Welcome to another edition of the Bob and Zip Show with Ed Kelly. And today we welcome Drew Lane of the Drew and Mike Show, which is a podcast which I'm going to recommend you should stop listening to my podcasts and start listening to that one because Drew is spectacular. He was the morning show host at WRIF in Detroit for 22 years with his partner Mike. And he also co-hosted with Zip on several cities. three different cities, and even additionally to that, I could say so much about Drew for so long, and it'll work its way into the conversation. Drew replaced me in, I believe, 1986 or 1987 as Zip's co-host in Boston at WAAF.
September 87, and I remember it well because I was very nervous about it because when I worked at WROV in Roanoke, we had the American Comedy Network, and it seemed like every week there was a new parody from Bob and Zip, and there was the AT&T breakup parody, which was a big one.
Mm-hmm.
What was the name of that?
That was called "Breaking Up Is Hard on You." It was a Neil Sedaka thing. Yes.
Yeah.
Charted, by the way.
Good.
It charted on the Billboard Hot 100. It got to number 69, ironically. And
really?
Then it turned around and went in the other direction.
Was that your highest charting parody?
On the Billboard Hot 100, yes. Yeah.
It was a big deal. And I was very, I'd heard the names Bob and Zip quite a bit. And then I went to Charlotte, which I was paid $35,000 a year to go from, $270 a week to $35,000. I was like, oh my God, $35,000. Holy shit. And I was so excited to be in Charlotte. And we had the American Comedy Network, and we heard a lot about your parodies. And when Bob was leaving WAAF and I applied, I just sent a tape in thinking, nothing will happen. Cindy Slater called me, and all of a sudden I was a pretty good candidate to work with Zip. And I was really excited and kind of intimidated by the whole thing because you guys had, you really got a lot of attention. You guys were great self-promoters. And so it ended up.
Come on, Zip. Don't just smile and chuckle. Right. Say what you think. Okay.
Let him continue.
Are you not?
Let me hear the setup.
Never interrupt someone praising you. Keep going.
Someone between you two was a good self-promoter. You're you shouldn't argue with me about that.
Anyway. I'm sorry, Mr. Garfunkel, that I did all the self-promotion.
So suddenly, Bob is at WIYY. I get the job. I come in and I get this story about, we were going to go together, and then we were going to go to KZAP in Sacramento. Great job. No cut deal, a lot of money. And then what happened? I'm not sure I really know what happened. I think I know, but.
This is Zip's story.
It's one in many business decisions I've grown to not look back at fondly. But no, I don't want to get into that negative stuff. But it was.
Why does it have to be negative? I mean,
it's not negative. I'll get into it. First off, let me say this about Zip. This whole show is about Zip. It has nothing to do with me.
Oh, yeah,
right. And I think, Drew, you'll understand this. When Zip and I, first off, when I got to WAAF, I was the interim fill-in host for mornings. I was not good enough to do the job. I worked with Lana Jones, who was a wonderful news broadcaster who went on to television.
May she rest in peace, by the way.
She passed away. I was going to say that, but yes. And she and I did not, I wanted to be a goofy morning guy, and she wanted to do serious news. So there was lots of admiration, no chemistry there. Anyway, when Zip came along, I had worked with him in New Hampshire at a radio station run by a drug addict. We were all comfortable together. And
he's also dead.
Yeah, he passed away too. So and when Zip came in, we had this chemistry. There was something about Zip. To this day, Zip is my muse. Zip is the guy where I came alive, first of all, because he laughed at my jokes.
That helps.
Obvious, but also he has an intellectual sensibility about him. You can see it on his face. Sometimes he doesn't say it out loud. But he just, I don't know, that something happened between the two of us. We did bits together. We had a show that just got ridiculously powerful at WAAF. And when I left, because I know you're asking the story, why we didn't leave together. the thing about the two of us is that we were both expert practicing alcoholics in so many ways, and not just alcohol too. Um,
Well, I would have thought you would have gone together then. Why not stay together in a safe environment where you're with another boozer?
that was my plan because I was so codependent on Zip. And now, Zip, you have to tell your side of the story.
Well, no, I was misled, I believe, by management just a little, and
Anytime it's not by me,
built
that's
up.
good. Yeah.
I had built up all these relationships, and in the area, and a lot of good clients, and it was comfortable. And they laid a story on me that didn't actually come to fruition, shall we say?
Oh, okay. So WAAF begged you to stay.
Yes, in an attempt to keep on, quite honestly, I mean, I'll say the both of us together, but they were really, I think, focused on hanging on to Bob. Just, for many reasons, actually.
So then why did you take the pitch and Bob didn't? Because you wanted to stay. You're a New England guy.
Well, to clarify, Bob had the IYY thing in his back pocket, which I knew nothing about, which really wouldn't have made a difference anyway.
I see.
Everything I have is in my front pocket, Zip. Just you have to ask. So here's what happens, and I'm going to tell a little detail on this story. And Zip, by the way, you can tell Zip doesn't want to say something when his voice goes up a little bit. You know that. So we had airline tickets to go out to Sacramento to meet with a nationwide manager of KZAP, and I think it was the day before the flight that Zip said, "I can't go. I'm not going to go." And I said, "But they're expecting to see Bob and Zip." And he had a girlfriend at the time, as he always does, a very hot girlfriend.
Oh, Drew is aware of that.
Yeah, the idea of leaving those tatas for any major market for any amount of money. I mean, you remember, right? We're not going to call out all the names here, but I was like, yeah, I'd probably stay. Anyway, so I get on the plane without Zip.
Oh.
Jesus.
And I'm embarrassed because I'm landing without Zip.
Mm-hmm.
I back in those days I used to lie as much as I could, and so I was trying to figure out some excuse, and I said, I'm not sure if he wants to come, or maybe he wasn't feeling well. I can't even remember all the various scenarios, but I met the GM and he took me for a tour. And by the way, Zip, wrong station, wrong GM, wrong time. Sacramento would have been a disaster for both of us, because at that time, Nationwide it's owned by an insurance company at the time. And it was a fine broadcasting company, somewhat conservative. No manager would not be in a suit and a tie. No salesperson would not be dressed as if working for a Fortune 500 company. And it was a rock station and very successful. But also, can I say this about Sacramento? On the bottom of my list of places that would be cool to live.
Yeah, Boston was. It was so cool to live in Boston, to do the music awards, and Aerosmith's there, and Aerosmith comes into Chuck Nolan's Bar and Grill, and Annalisa's got Lou Reed coming in. She's got a countdown for 40 days or whatever. And by the way, he was a big disappointment. One word answers. I think she was crushed by it. And she's at WXRT in Chicago, by the way. What a pile of talent at radio station.
Oh, yes, the whole station to this day. And so Zip made the right call not coming, and I didn't take that job. And it was a while later, more offers came in. We were, and we should tell this part of the story. There was a big radio station in Boston, WBCN. Morning show host Charles Laquidera, PD Oedipus. And Oedipus, and I've heard this secondhand, I didn't hear it from him personally, basically said, get those guys off that radio station. Get them out of here. So that's why I was getting these calls. I got a call from it was a station in Atlanta. It was a KSL, 3-letter rock station. I got a call from KZAP. I got a call from Baltimore. And it was
KLOS too.
We were interviewed for the Mark and Brian job, by the way.
I tell you, when you're hot, you're hot. And when you're not, you're not.
Well, we were not hot in that interview, and we were not hot when we showed up hungover the next morning, because they never even called us back after the interview.
Oh, boy. Well, that's a shame. I'm glad to hear. See, I heard that that Zip didn't show up for a meeting, and I got the impression there was an actual meeting, but he didn't show up for a flight. So that's
the flight. Yeah. Well, the flight to the meeting. So, by the way, when stories get told about you and exaggerated, it's almost fun to leave them exaggerated.
Yeah.
Because the story about me in Seattle is that I showed up naked and coked out of my mind at the radio station.
Yeah, I think I did.
I heard it was a bed and breakfast.
I did hear that story.
I most recently heard it with a bunch of broadcast execs, and I was visiting them in Nashville, and they were like, "What about that? What about that thing?" And I was like, parts of it are true, but the actual true story, like it's in my bio now because of this, radio nomination to the Radio Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
And my friend who was writing the bio, he said he wrote naked and coked out of his mind at the station. And I went, should I correct that?
Can I just ask if you were naked?
Well, all of us are naked at some point or another. So do you want to know the true story?
Yeah, well, I just want to know if you were naked. I'm not demanding the whole.
That's all. And even that, I'm not sure why. Yes.
Okay. That's enough of a story already. The coke part, I assume there's some substance involved.
This involves actually hitting bottom and going into treatment.
Okay.
Which happened coincidentally right with my arrival at KISW.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And
it was that close.
It was. Oh no, it was within weeks. And what it was it was the marijuana on the West Coast. If you're eligible for psychosis, and again, when we used to smoke it back in the day, and maybe you're on it now, I don't know. No, back then it was weak stuff, and it just gave you a little bit of a buzz. I sort of flipped out on this stuff, and I was having all kinds of problems. My wife and I had separated temporarily because I was kind of crazy. I had this huge ego, which is ironically the title of Bob and Zip's big, huge video that was on MTV. And
big ego.
And I arrived there to an unfriendly radio station. You see, when I got to KISW, and Zip is right to be concerned. Anytime you jump from market to market, you take a tremendous risk.
Oh yeah,
it's like opening a new restaurant. The failure rate is pretty high. And so when I got there, every single person at that radio station had been told they weren't getting raises because we hired this morning guy.
Well, that's a good way to do business.
Yeah, I was the 6th morning show to be on that radio station in a year and a half. So that's like being Spinal Tap's drummer.
Can I ask so you were off the ground when this incident occurred? You'd been on the air a few weeks?
I'd been on the air maybe a few weeks, and it was not going well. And honestly, I missed my partner and muse and best friend, Zip Zipfel. I missed him terribly. I literally went for the money and left my friend behind. That's how I felt. And by the way, he felt that way too.
Well, a number of years.
Yeah. You've been in Detroit with me for 22 years too. I mean,
I know.
I'm sorry. I hate to say it, but I just want to say it because talent wise and personality wise, you were great to work with for Bob. And I felt the same way when you were on your game. There was nobody better. And so it's just like it could have easily been. It wasn't a question. The fact that it happened without you, was all good and well. It was good for Mike, but the three of us were working together very well.
Yeah.
At times we were working great together.
There is a theme here because I managed to put together a show, but to replace Zip, I had to surround myself with 7 different people who fulfilled various aspects of that magic, that chemistry. And Zip and I do a show now every Saturday on 100 FM The Pike in Worcester. And seriously, from the moment we crack the mic, it's like we're the Smothers Brothers. We just sort of look at each other funny, and whatever we're talking about, it's like he makes me great, and he is intellectually curious, but also Zip has this careful thing about him that's like
doesn't like to take a stand.
Yeah, he doesn't like to take a stand. But he has one, and it's usually out of kindness and love, which is it's so few clicks these days that he's still like my best friend and one of the best people I know. So naked. By the way, this is how you take the word naked and you get a quarter hour of listening out.
Can I make a quick comment?
Please.
When I came back from Detroit, Greg Hill called me.
Okay.
And was working at AAF, and he says, "Man, he says, you know, I got to get in a bigger market. Got to be in a bigger market. Got to be in a bigger market." I said, "Man, stay where you are, build up some relationships with your clients, and hang in there, man. Your perceived value is what it's all about." And I rest my case. He did take that advice,
and he's still doing our morning show, Drew.
Yeah,
in Boston. Yeah.
He followed me with Ruby Cheeks
Yep.
on AAF, and then Ruby disappeared, and Greg had this great run, and he's on. Is it EEI now? I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
When they sold WAAF to the Christian group, I forget what it's called, and it went all God all the time, which Ozzy would be spinning in his grave, except for the strange fact that he's still alive.
And in another twist of irony, the
Yeah.
morning guy ends up being our producer in Phoenix, Skip Mahaffey.
Yeah, that's right.
That's incredible.
So they moved Greg Hill because of his, a successful morning show is bankable, and they moved him to the sports station where they still thrive. So anyway, back to nudity.
I want to know how you survived that, Bob, because you said you got off to a bad start. Then this horrible, bottom out happens. It seems like at that time in particular, it would have been really easy to say, okay, this is a debacle. Bye, Bob. Here's a little cash to go away on, and you can find your way. But they stuck with you for some reason.
Yeah, they did. And so here's what happened. I was basically going through a kind of a bottom nervous breakdown, not getting anything out of work because I hadn't built up any chemistry yet. And my wife and I were squabbling in a sense. We had a brief separation. And during that time, one of the salespeople said, "I know of this bed and breakfast you can stay at." And he brought me to this. It was not an Airbnb. This was long before the internet. But he brought me to this bed and breakfast, and I was the only guest. And there was a caretaker there. It was in Pike Place Market. If you've ever been a tourist in Seattle, that's like it's like Faneuil Hall in Boston. It's a beautiful spot with all kinds of character and strange people too. A very good people watching place, big tourist attraction. Anyway, I'm in this little historical bed and breakfast, and the person who was running it, I was clearly there to just sort of chill out. I had stopped doing anything to get high. And I never did anything harsh after Baltimore, actually. Baltimore was the party town. And I had maybe had a little pot, but what happened is I started to, and no alcohol, removing self-medication. And anybody who's been through the 12-step program or knows somebody intimately that has done this, when you remove your self-medicating, that is real pain. And what happened is I stopped sleeping. So for about 3 or 4 days in a row, I can only sleep for maybe 90 minutes and then go in and try and do the morning show.
Oh, boy. Well, no wonder the show wasn't going well.
Thanks. So I had partners. I had a Spike that I brought from Baltimore, and an amazing guy named Sean Donahue, who's the son of the late great Tom Donahue, who's considered the father of album rock radio from San Francisco, if you know any of your radio history.
Uh-huh.
And so, even though it wasn't going well, it was mostly, I was experiencing this difficulty. And so when I got to this place, it was empty all day. And I had this little room. Well, one morning I woke up. The nudity is on its way. I woke up. No one was at the place. And it had this great room right outside my door with a massive picture window that you could see the Pike Place Market, and you could see the Olympic Mountains. Zip knows where this. He's just shaking his head. And I walked out in my birthday suit and walked up to the window and quite literally said a prayer. Raised Roman Catholic, not a good person who practices it a lot, but something about priest pedophiles turned me off. I don't know. But anyway, so I'm one of those disgruntled Catholics. So I go up to the window and I just look and there's beams of sunlight and beautiful skies. And I'm standing there in the altogether completely in my birthday suit, saying a little prayer. And all of a sudden, the caretaker of the bed and breakfast opens the door behind me and walks in.
Does he know you're doing the morning show at KSW?
It was a she, unfortunately, and
sorry.
And of course she did. And so, and you know that that Winston Churchill expression, a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth gets its pants on.
I've heard it before.
You read. I know we're at a disadvantage. So, that story, and by the way, after that, I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and I went in my room and I dressed up. And she said, "Are you okay?" I said, "Not really. I got a lot of stuff going on." And it was just, she seemed like very kind and nice. And she said, "Well, let's take a walk. You could use a walk." And I go outside and we're walking. And as we walk by, and there's tons of homeless people. That's something about Seattle that hasn't changed since 1989. And at one point, this homeless guy comes up and he's talking to me, and I'm very low on sleep, but I thought this guy seems real nice. And I reached in my pocket and I gave him a $20 bill. And so it became Bob is walking naked through Pike Place handing out money. And by the way, all this precipitated my 12-step group and my I actually checked into a place for a week. And Nationwide Insurance owned this radio station. And so insurance companies aren't great at rock and roll and parties, and, but they understand illness and recovery. And they said, we'll stand behind him because if this works and he gets sober, then he'll be a better morning show even than the one we hired. And that was a blessing.
So Bob, is that the first time you told this story?
It's the first time I've publicly told this story.
Okay. I wondered. Were police involved? I really don't know. I'm asking.
Well, no, it was. It's funny. It was one person inside that walked in on. So there was really. I mean, Zip. What do you think? Is this a police matter?
Speaking from personal experience, I could see where a discerning officer may see the humanitarian side of it.
If it's on your Wikipedia page, I just would figure it must have been something. I just realized too that Zip is the one who told me whatever I knew, which wasn't much. I just knew that you had really, something had gone horribly, horribly wrong. You were off the air. And then the next thing I knew, you were on the air and you guys were talking before our show, which was funny, even after the whole KZAP thing, which was, I thought, oh, well, that's the end of that friendship, or, it's a total disaster. You guys started communicating when we were on AAF and you were in Baltimore. And I thought, well, that's weird that they're networking. I was kind of like, why is he talking to Bob? Is it trying to get out of here? What's going on? But then we get a great parody song and be, well, that's okay. we're sharing bits.
Zip, please comment on this, Zip.
Oh, no.
When did you start hating me, and how
recall.
many years did it last is what he's trying to get to, right?
No, Zip was not. I don't think Zip was acted hateful. It's just that something had splintered. I mean, the fact is you weren't working together was enough. But then what little I knew about the Sacramento thing was that somebody didn't show up somewhere. And then you guys weren't really talking. And then all of a sudden you were networking and friendly. And I even would get in the conversation occasionally, and there were lots of laughs and everything seemed fine. And the same thing in Phoenix when you guys would talk in the morning. And it was usually to share an idea about the show for the day.
Can I ask how much you're charging per hour for this session?
Well, it was interesting on my end. I just didn't know, is Zip trying to get away? Is he? I mean, because in radio, there's always those behind the scenes.
Oh yeah,
people making, and you guys were formidable as a team, so it was something I had to be concerned about.
I'd be lying if I said that alcohol didn't play a part in bad decisions, certainly on my part, and also gave a lot of credence to whatever type of broadcast management wanted to show me the door. You know what I'm saying? And I think a lot of that, my anger and resentment, not to go 12-step on you, it took quite a while to dissipate. So a lot of that was on me. And it truly was.
Well, Zip, when I got to WAAF, Cindy Slater was the program director. Cindy's great. I loved her. I thought she was one of the best program directors.
I did too. Yeah.
Maybe the best, which is interesting. I'd never worked for a female as a PD before, and she was so good. And I loved her husband, Michael, too. Still do. And Cindy was kind of indicating that, there may be a problem with Zip. Zip might not make it. And I was kind of like, what are you talking about? Because Zip was performing fabulously when I got there. When we started together, no, you were killing it, but there was some damage that apparently could not be undone. And I couldn't understand it for the life of me. Like, what, are you kidding me? And then you left, and then Karen left a year later, and you came back full force, 100%. I remember you took all these IDs that bands had done, and we slipped you in there. Like, hey, this is Mick, this is Keith, Zip here. And it was that you had been filling in bands, and the IDs were perfectly EQ'd too. You sounded like you were in the room with these guys. They were hilarious. It was the dumbest, stupid. It was just a really stupid, funny bit. But you came back full force, and we were rocking it. And that's what got us the job in Phoenix. Was you were tearing it up again, and it was just so strange that interim thing happened, because you never were not performing well at AAF, but something. When you and Bob split up, and you had something going on with your girlfriend, which was
yeah, but again, I kind of go back to that term perception. Especially, there's safety in numbers, I would say, in morning show.
Amen.
Correct.
Yeah. Sure.
And I think that was a big part of it, perceptually. And I don't know individuals, and it's many years past, but that's how I felt upon the dismissal from AAF, and was thrilled to come back, and even more thrilled to go to beautiful Scottsdale, Arizona.
Zip, to your point, Zip, that this is a common thing. And in a morning show, we're like a family, and we all have each other's back. And if someone's going through a difficult time, I mean, look at the Stern Show, where, heroin addiction was a part of it. We, for that 3 hours or 4 hours that you're in your family, it's the best, at least throughout my whole career, it's the best 4 hours of your day. And you're at your best. And so it's funny. I was jealous that you had Zip. I missed him.
Yeah,
every day. So to the point where when I retired, Zip and I started doing a weekend show, and we've been doing it for 8 years now.
And I was kind of jealous too. I was like, oh fuck, he's doing a show with Bob. You know what? This is funny. My 25-year anniversary in Detroit came up, and I wasn't at WRIF anymore. I wasn't even on the radio. I just started this podcast 6 months earlier, and I thought, I should have Zip on. And so Zip and I talked for the first time in eons. And when you said, yeah, let's do it, I wasn't nervous for a second. We did the show. The show was really funny. It went by so fast. And so many people said, wow, you guys are great together. And I thought, that's incredible. We've barely spoken in a couple of decades. And the show was great. Of course, we had great stories to tell, most of them about disasters in Boston. But it was a really fun show. Very self-deprecating, I must admit.
Yes.
Speaking of self-deprecating, let's bring in a Detroit guy and talk a little bit about you, because Drew Lane, you are our guest. And I find it fascinating, your career, and have to, without too much bootlicking, because telling stories is more fun. I do have to say that a huge part of my recovery in Seattle was getting tapes of the Drew Lane show over the years. And we basically traded Twisted Tunes for air checks. And I have always listened to air checks of great radio people as inspiration. This is Ed Kelly joining us, by the way, a huge Drew and Mike fan, a Detroit lifer, and Ed, one of the great voice chameleons of the entire industry. Anyway, welcome, Ed.
Thank you. Drew who?
You were at the American Comedy Network when Bob and Zip were doing their parodies at AAF. Were you not doing voices then too?
I was.
You were, okay.
Yeah, I also, I don't know if you guys recall this or not, but I actually called you and Zip. Were you on AAF together in the
Yes.
late? Yeah.
Yes.
We did cross-country party check from London, Ontario, and used to call you guys because it was a guaranteed smash into the seats.
You were doing voices, weren't you?
I was doing mornings, but I'm sure there was some voices involved. I don't know.
By the way, you don't
contemporary
mind if I do some self-deprecating on you, Ed.
Yeah.
Drew's show was so big, he doesn't remember that you were a direct competitor.
Well, speaking of,
No, your show in Detroit is as big and legendary and long-running, 22 years, as any. And I would get tapes of you and your conversational style, also your energy. But you used to do something hardly any rock talk morning shows would do, is you would read books about interesting people, and then you would retell the stories. And, we'd reached a time where no one thought that books were important at all. But your ability to narrate stories still to this day on your podcast is amongst the best I've ever heard. So I was listening to and learning from you. Then Zip got not with you. I'm not going to say canned or whatever. He just got not with you.
they broke up.
Not with you. That's very kind. Thank you.
Yes. And,
Hey, I've lost 3 jobs too. So,
and I've been shown the door so many times. All of them prior to being sober, if that's a hint.
Mm.
So anyway, Zip at one point after that showed up at my house because he was going to put a tape together, and we were headed out on vacation. I said, take my recording studio, put a tape together. And when I came back, he had left chasing another girlfriend. I don't know. And can I tell what I found in the driveway?
Oh, no.
This is post Betty Ford. Remember, Drew, I left Detroit and
lying, and I was like worried about him. I hope he isn't, because I've been through mental health issues myself. I was worried about him. By now I understood we were brothers in this, dependence thing of alcoholism, and sitting in my driveway, glinting in the sunlight, was a Betty Ford sobriety coin, and I went
checking into Betty Ford. Hey.
I was like, oh shit, now I'm worried about him. I should have canceled.
May I say, I don't recall that. I honestly do not recall.
Well, Senator, wow.
this wasn't something you intentionally dropped in the driveway. It just fell out of your pocket. Or was it fired at the ground, spiked like
it was like, fuck you, Bob, and your vacation and your
coin.
Oh, Jesus.
And so there were years, Drew. And we're going to talk more about you, Drew, but we're going to work this in, obviously, because you're a kind soul. There were years, Drew, where Zip didn't return my calls, maybe a decade or more. And
I said, hold my calls.
But you kept kicking ass in Detroit. And one of my great joys always in radio has been not just to make the Twisted Tunes, but that someone, would care about them who was huge. And Scott Shannon played them, Rick Dees played them. They all made up phony names like, that's the Scott Shannon Morning Chorus. And these are the Rick Dees singers doing Ignorant Man. But you were kind. You played them. You thanked me for them, and as did Brother Weeze and a bunch of other people around the country. And I lived for that. I lived to make content that to me it was all about, does it work? Is it hitting? Is it popular?
Bowel moves. I love your breasts the way they. I love your breasts the way they are. Oh, they were all great, and we gave you credit, and I didn't mind giving you credit because I knew you weren't going to give them to anybody else in town if I gave you credit, right?
That is true. I didn't even think about that, but very smart. Yeah,
there was a little self-centeredness there. But these people, the Scott Shannon morning singer. I don't know how you can take credit for something like that. It's just
what. I don't resent it because that was old school radio. And by the way, I have to say this. people would steal bits and ideas from each other because consultants would actually pull into town with a wagon of, you should do the psychedelic lunch, you should do the Sunday breakfast with the Beatles, and they had all these ideas for rock stations because it worked. And so when songs and parodies were made, like by Ed working and his bits at the American Comedy Network, they were meant to be networked. And so when someone gets it, you know, I didn't say this is that was from the American Comedy Network. This great guy from Canada, Ed Kelly, did the voice.
No, I didn't either.
Yeah,
Dale Reeves was part of our staff. He was a lot of voices on the American Comedy Network, and yeah, we just did the bits as if someone in our building was doing the voice, or Zip was doing it, or I was doing it.
Yeah, and I never resented it, but you know what I did resent?
What?
I did not care what they said on the air. I would place a call to Rick Dees every day after I heard from people that he was playing it in LA. I mean, he was my idol. He did Disco Duck. I would place a call to Rick Dees and say, it's Bob, I heard you were playing the song. Give me a call back. I just want to thank you in person. That's all I wanted. Never got a call back. Scott Shannon, we met Scott Shannon at a some kind of a radio thing. That no, it wasn't boot camp. It was a thing. Zip and I were both there.
Yeah, it was near Bridgeport, near the company headquarters.
NAB? No.
Did that turn sour later in the evening, possibly?
No. Scott was a consummate pro and a gentleman and gracious. And from then on, he built us up, not on his airwaves.
Yeah,
that's his show. So it was all wonderful. I mean, just a chance. Look, I grew up listening to the radio. My grandfather gave me a transistor radio when I was 5 years old. To me, everyone on the radio was a huge hero and a huge star. So I still had that, you know, stars in my eyes at these famous people. So just to be considered was something.
That's how I felt about the parodies and the American Comedy Network stuff. Is like, wow, this stuff is on 200 stations, because the American Comedy Network was huge at that time, and the bits were great, and we did get credit for them, and it made me do better bits too, or at least try to do something. I mean, that's kind of creativity that's not really around anymore, unfortunately. But when I got to AAF, we weren't there. Let's see, I was there maybe 6 months or so when the Orioles started off 0-5, and Bob decided, I'm going to stay on the air until the Orioles win.
Yeah, good job, Bob.
Sitting there. Well, how long is this going to go on? The Orioles ended up going 0-21. You were on the air for how long?
258 and a half hours.
Well, you were on Larry King at night. You were on all these shows, and it was like we had just gotten past the people calling, going, "Where's Bob's weather? What happened?" And it was really annoying to me as a guy, you know, whereas for anybody who's replacing anyone, it's really frustrating when you're trying to get people to forget someone, and this Orioles thing happened, and it was like, oh my God. And I remember when they were about 0-12, Cindy came in one day and said, "Oh, Charles had Bob on this morning." I was like, oh shit, Charles had Bob on. Oh my God, on WBCN, which is like, fuck. So then I thought, well, why don't we have Bob on? What, are we stupid? So we started having Bob on, and we sort of grabbed on. It was like, I think that's where maybe we started as sort of a friendship started, because at that point I was completely like, oh my God, this guy, there's no getting away from. Then we go another 5 or 6 months, and it's like, oh, Bob's finally fading away to Baltimore. And then the Christmas album comes out, driving from Boston to DC, and every market is playing Bob Rivers' Twisted Christmas. Here's the 12 Pains of Christmas, or the restroom door said Gentleman. It was like, wow. I mean, you were just on a roll then.
But here's what you should know. That was recorded in Worcester with Zip, with a whole cast of characters and people. And by the way, if Zip had a good reason to resent me, and I think he has a basket of them,
I already know the answer to this.
I didn't actually, you know, credit him anywhere near enough for his contribution. Look, he played drums on at least a couple of songs, and was there for all of the and then we had a drum machine, which was the new thing, which is, and I realized that magic came out of Worcester, and that album was massive.
That magic came from you appearing on the Larry King Show, Bob Rivers.
Well,
hello.
But no, let me add some more color to that, because at Worcester there was this whole nucleus of people around the guy who's still our boss, named Bob Goodell, and there was Cliff Goodwin, who toured with the Joe Cocker Band. and there was this guy, Brian Silva and Dennis Amiro, and we were a comedy writing team, and we would record in my basement on a 8-track recorder, and the kids crying in the 12 Pains of Christmas are my kids. And there was a whole, like Joanna List, there were all these local musicians. So that was a Worcester project. And I show up in Baltimore without Zip, and several failed sidekick attempts ensued, doing a show leaning heavily on the American Comedy Network. The Orioles marathon thing, the album propped me up, much larger than life.
That
And
was huge everywhere.
yeah. And oh, by the way, the press on that, it was so crazy. I remember one evening, and this is before memes, this is before social media.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you want a kicker story now, you just lift up your phone and see what the torches and pitchforks are all aiming at. But back then, oh, someone decided this is a good kicker story. And because it's a serial drama, it was on everybody every day. And I would get, at one point, satellite trucks assembled in the yard outside WBAL TV, which we were the FM radio station. We were the bastard stepchild of WBAL radio, a great news talk station. And these satellite trucks set up, and they told me, "You're doing an interview tree for the evening news." And I'm like, "What's that?" "Well, you're going to be asked a question, but your answers are going to 60 evening news affiliates, and they're going to cut it so they're asking you the question. So in the top 60 major markets, you're doing," and I didn't even know such a thing was possible. And I'm looking out at the satellite dishes, and it was unreal to me. Part of the credit for this goes to the people of Baltimore. When you're living that WKRP in Cincinnati, traveling from town to town life, you realize each city has its own unique character. And the Magic in Worcester made that album, but the people of Baltimore, oh, they are East Coast, tight with your bros, family. They loved the Baltimore Orioles. Like for example, in Boston, if the Red Sox are in a World Series and they lose Game 5, they suck. They're stupid. They're awful, right? You get in a cab and think it's the worst team that there ever was. And the Red Sox win plenty of pennants. But in Baltimore, with the team 0-11, I think, when I started, the people were like, "We love these guys. These guys, come on, guys, you can do it." The opposite of what so many cities, I think. And so I just went, well, let's rally for them, because I'm counterintuitive. Whatever's the thing you would do, I would love to try. I'm a devil's advocate. I'd love to try the opposite. And so I just did typical radio things. I said, "Well, wear your underwear on the outside if you support the Baltimore Orioles. And you know what? Drive with your headlights on all day long to show part of the support." Well, we had a certain amount of power. It was the big rock station. But once the evening news rebroadcasts that if you support the Orioles, drive with your headlights on, if you were in Baltimore and everybody has their headlights on, it's the greatest. It was a really amazing opportunity. And so they lost 21 in a row, and they came home for the return home game.
Bob, how bad did you want them to win at that point? Or were you enjoying listening so much you were hoping they would keep losing?
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to censor a little bit of what I say here, but the issue was staying awake.
Yeah. Oh,
And I did want them to win, but you're all performers in radio. I was highly aware that this kind of promotion was awesome, and you see the smile on your general manager's face, and you see, I'd also come into that radio station as the outsider, but all the jocks went, "This is great for our station," so it sort of built a sense of family, and so.
How much music were you playing during the day, per se? Were you playing 10 songs an hour? Would you talk from 3 to 4 if you felt like it?
We're talking baseball 5 times in a row.
Yeah, this is pre morning show talk show radio era, because most good rock shows evolved to a talk format because it got better ratings, and also because they like to tell management, "I don't like the music." But But this was so, 5 songs an hour in morning drive, 7 or 8 the rest of the time. But I did all the breaks. But I had a cast around me the whole radio station, and like literally big celebrities would just call,
Wow.
and we would put them on the air, and they were all wonderful. I remember one Larry King appearance. I was going to be on the Larry King show at midnight, and between midnight and like 4 a.m. we would put on King Biscuit Flower Hour concerts that were 90 minutes, and I would look. Truth be told, I would cut a few voice tracks in between them, and they would say, "Try to sleep for 4 hours," but I was still on the radio. And one night I had to be on with Larry King. Had to be on with Larry King. I loved Larry King. He was
What a bummer.
You were on with everyone.
well. What I liked about Larry is because I was never a shock jock. I tried it. It didn't work for me. I mean, I loved Howard Stern too, but I couldn't try to be like him. And Larry had this thing. He would always do this, no matter who his guest was an astronaut, a president, a scientist, a world leader. He would introduce them in such a way that you knew that you were going to love them. And he would introduce people and so I was going to be on his show. I was petrified. I was going to be on this syndicated show with one of my idols. And I spent the whole day. I don't know if you've ever been nervous about a public appearance. Anybody?
New stock. Yeah.
Yeah. I spent the whole day freaking out about it and totally petrified. And when I'm listening to go on with him on the headphones in front of the microphone, he introduces me and he says, "We're about to bring on a huge celebrity. This guy has taken the world by storm with his love for his city and his team." And he, oh, by the way, he had co-hosts that night. He had Joe Garagiola.
Oh, geez.
And who's the guy who's still stretching his face to host the Olympics on NBC?
Bob
Bob
Costas.
Costas, thank you.
Stretching his face. He's got surprise
Ding, ding, ding,
eyes.
ding.
Yeah.
Did you stretch his face that much?
But I mean, Bob,
Wind tunnel testing part-time.
you know what I mean. God bless him.
He's
And
great.
he's a genius. But so I wasn't just going on with Larry. I was going on with Larry, Joe Garagiola, and Bob Costas, and they're having this discussion to introduce me as the greatest sports fan who ever lived. And and so he goes, "Bob." Oh, Garagiola says, "Bob, what were you thinking?"
Mostly quarter hours. So.
Yeah. And all I remember is that during the introduction, I can't remember the interview too much, but all I remember is that during the introduction, all my nervousness evaporated because I knew that they were going to be wonderful. And we had like a rip-roaring, funny 15, 20 minutes with Larry King. I know. And oh, you get the darker rimmed glasses, Ed, and you're all there.
Lizard in suspenders.
Yeah.
Hey, but I have to be the radio guy and ask the question: what were the ratings like when the monthly came in for the month you were on the air all by yourself for 12 days or 14 days or whatever?
I sort of remember the ratings were very good. I mean, we were in the, you'll know what this means. We were like in the threes as a, top 5, 25, 54. And they weren't like 10 shares, but they were in the upper 4s. And all of a sudden we were like number 1, 25, 54.
Cool. Yeah.
So in a market like that, and you know what this means, where you have Washington, D.C., the grease man, and you have Baltimore. Yeah. It was buku signals. So it was good. Let's skip ahead to some fun stuff now. Let's talk more about you, Drew Lane.
Okay.
22 years in Detroit, a competitive city. What was your vision for your morning show? And what's your, I want to hear a little bit of your philosophy, because every morning show host has their own, what psychs you out and why you do it.
I would say I like to think that I'm better prepared than anyone else. That is what I do well. And if I do that well, then I probably have a pretty good shot of competing near the top. And I think maybe I overdo it. I probably do overdo it. I spend too much time preparing, and not that it doesn't make for a good show, but I mean, I think it's just could be a little obsessive at times. Like the antenna is always up. Now with phones, I'm always checking, hey, what's going on? Let's see what the Daily Mail, let's see what New York Post has. I tend to look at those tabloidish places. Although I will like to look at the New York Times and the Washington Post from time to time, depending on what's going on. But when we got the job in Detroit, I really just wanted to survive a couple years in Detroit, because I thought if you could, at that time in 1991, if you could work in a major market for a couple years, you basically had that stamped on your back and you could get a job forever. It's like, I told you, making $35,000 in Charlotte. That was probably the most excited I ever was about a contract.
Mm-hmm.
Though I made many, many more times that down the road, because I thought, wow, I can make a living in radio doing this. I mean, that's how I felt in 1986 or 85 or whatever year it was. But going to Detroit, I really felt like, God, if we can just compete here and survive a couple years. And then, after a couple years, it's like, well, maybe we can make 5 years here. And if you're in a market like that for 5 years, then, you've really made a mark and you're going to stay employed. And then as time goes on and we started really winning, then it's like, well, we got to be number one. I mean, if we're not number one, fuck. And people are like, oh my God, they're losing it. And then Stern came in. It sounds paranoid, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Stern came in. Ted Nugent came in before Stern. Opie and Anthony came in. We had everything.
They were throwing everything at you, by the way. Did you feel that? Because I felt that at one point too. They were trying to dislodge you.
I kind of did, although Howard wanted to rule the world, so it wasn't like he didn't. I mean, and he
was it you personally?
No, I didn't take it personally. But honestly, when he came into Detroit, he did it like he did everywhere else. Oh, Drew and Mike, they're trying to steal my act, and they do this and they do that, and it sounded so stupid if you knew our show, because our show was nothing like his show, and he was in the middle of his movie, Private Parts. And there was so much movie promotion and the movie. I think it was a bad launch in Detroit for him. Not to say that we didn't do well at what we were doing and we couldn't have beaten him otherwise. But I think that it was pretty clear the dichotomy of the two shows, the one that was local, that was there every day talking about the Red Wings and the Stanley Cup, and the one who was bragging about his movie, which is what Howard did. And he did it so well. So, first it was survival, then it was trying to stay on top. And then, now it's just, I just like doing it. It's just fun to do every day. It doesn't feel like a job.
Yeah, let me ask about that. I've been listening to your podcast a couple of times. It's funny. I have a lot of friends who do podcasts. I've done some hardly listened to podcasts myself with these guys, and I have friends who are on every single day still on major radio stations, and their podcasts everything's available, and I'll go years and I'll go, well, good on you, and then I start listening and I remember. Because I haven't had a lot of this in years. I remember why I got into this business. It was from being fans of incredible people in the business, whether it was Wolfman Jack or Howard Stern, who deserves lots of credit. I used to listen to tapes of him, or you, or heck, I listened to Dr. Laura because I was like, how can you be such a
B-I-T-C.
I'm trying to think whether I should use the B word or the C. I'll go with the B word. And I was like, how can you do that? And yet the show is so captivating. And I would listen to Tom Likas, and I would listen to, when I grew up, Gene Shepard in New York. And so lately listening to podcasts, and I'm going to take this opportunity to say, if you haven't listened to the Drew and Mike show and you miss the kind of chemistry that, a fully produced show has, you're not just doing a podcast yourself. You have taken your whole radio show. You've got Trudy and you've got Mark, right? And who else?
And Brandon, and Jim is here today. Jim's here a couple days a week. And we've got a YouTube channel now. So a lot of our bits are on YouTube, which is everyone is doing that now in podcasting.
Right. Eli Zaret on occasion.
Yes, Eli Zarrett too on Mondays for sports for the weekend. Ed, is WJR to have a YouTube channel?
Thank you, by the way, for your earlier accolades of our new lineup next week. You did such a job lauding this $50,000 watt radio station. I said, thanks, Drew.
The great voice of the Great Lakes. No, it's one of the most famous stations in the world, WJR 760. But are they on YouTube? I don't mean that as a joke. What kind of?
Some shows are, some shows aren't. They're catching up on that social media end of things. Paul W., I think in particular, when he gets to his new time slot, is going to be on that like paint.
Okay. WJR, my understanding, going off topic here a little bit, but is the biggest billing station in Detroit.
And doesn't that piss you off?
I can't understand. I'm like, why isn't everyone trying to steal the sales staff at WJR? Because you got an AM that, doesn't have the ratings it used to have, or
not even close.
How are they still doing it?
See, we're the highest billing station in town, and we've got this many people. But these people are loaded. I'm telling you.
Could it be because that kind of talk, and not just about the politics, but that kind of talk creates such a loyal audience that brands get their money's worth by being on it, because it's not background. Everybody knows the music stations are somewhat gamed by the people meter to look like they have more audience than they do. If they don't, I just told you. Could it be the loyalty and fierceness of the audience? And relating that back to Drew Lane, who really is our topic right now, you with your podcast are not doing it the free, no advertising, or the Patreon pay to subscribe way. You're doing it with loyal clients who love you because it works for them, right?
Yeah, we have a really loud audience. They're loyal. They make a lot of noise when they call Hall Financial for a refi, or when they go buy a car from Zott. They make a ton of noise. And, I talk to
He just answered his own question, because he's the new WJR. He doesn't have as big an audience as he used to, but man, are they loyal and are they?
Yeah.
Do WJR people make a lot of noise when they go there? I don't know. I mean, we have an insurance guy on who gets 50 tips a month from the podcast. And I'm like, you've got to be exaggerating. There's no 50 tips a month. That seems insane. But I suppose it's possible. I mean, we definitely have people want us. I think when I started the podcast, I made it clear that if these advertisers do not succeed because of this show will disappear. And I think the audience took it very seriously, and they know it's true.
Yeah, they're loyal, and they're also proactive.
Yeah, you also went right from the radio. I needed a period of quiet meditation for 7 years after getting out of media. You went right from the radio show to your podcast.
Very smart.
You also do it 4 days a week, unlike lazy people who try to get together once every week or so. No, you're committed to it as you were to your show. And that was another question I wanted to make sure I asked you. You work as hard as you did.
Pretty much, except I don't make appearances. In fact, I've joked that I've retired from public life. There's a story behind that. We were calling a phone number on the air for Jimmy Stewart. Stewart.
Yeah.
From Ed. Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah. Can I help you, Drew?
He answers the phone. We just hear the phone clattering. He's got to be in his 80s, and we just hear, hello? And then the next thing you know, we hear another line pick up, and this woman says, hello, what can I do for you? And I said, we were just talking to Jimmy Stewart. This is Drew and Mike from WRIF. And Jimmy's going, and she said, Mr. Stewart has retired from public life. And then we heard Jimmy's phone get slammed. We heard that hang up. And I said, well, Jimmy, is he there? And she said, no, he hung up. His number again. And we were convinced that Jimmy was about to say, I'm being held hostage.
Maui, I'm being held hostage.
But that retired from life just sounded really cool to me. So I always hated appearances, so we never make appearances. I just work on the show, which is what I like.
Mm-hmm.
We were doing merchandise, which we stopped doing because it took too much time up, and we weren't very good at pricing either. We seem to sell a lot of merchandise, but not make a lot of money. So now we're going to start that up again. But I mean, basically, I just focused on what I like to do, which is the show, 2.5, 3 hours every day, 5 days. Now it's leaning 4 most of the time. And
we're doing 5.
Yeah, I was doing 5 every week. And by the way, when you said being a fan, when I saw you guys were doing a podcast, I was like, wow, I can hear Zip again. And and Ed's on there too. And I put it on. I had a ball listening, but it's like, 1 hour a week. Fuck.
Lazy fucks.
I love listening to other shows. I love hearing great shows. I love that there's a million podcasts out there because I can listen to, great podcasts, horrible podcasts, mostly great, but even bad ones are entertaining to me. And I spend a lot of time listening to other shows. I mean, that's to me what I love to do in my spare time. Not the number one thing, but a good podcast is just gold to me. I love it.
Now, Drew, you, I get asked this question. You, of course, also should be asked this question. It's probably one you've heard a million times. You don't have to work. You had such a long career. Surely between your Social Security and your Medicare and
so why does he keep hitting me up for $50? I don't understand.
Yeah. Was it a surprise to you as it was? Look, I took 7 years off. Was it a surprise to you in any way that it had really? And by the way, I'm glad that broadcasters that we negotiated with for good salaries didn't know I would do it for free. But was it a surprise to you that their passion had nothing to do with the paycheck or the contract? It's just in you to do this.
No, I don't have to work, but you're right. I would have done it for so much less, and the competitive environment forces you, of course, to accept the most amount of money you possibly can while you can. But it is really strange that you get paid to do this, and I'm not doing this for the money. But at the same time, I'm kind of competitive. I feel like I want to have the biggest audience, and I want to have the most advertising we can without, playing too many commercials in a podcast, because podcasts generally don't have a lot of commercials.
That's right.
But
so was this like your show? You started off with, well, let's see if we can do this for a couple of years. Yes. Now let's get better at it. Now let's make some money. Now let's kick ass and put KJR what is it called? Out of business.
WJR.
Let's put WJR in. I mean, competitive.
So we did. Bob, I went out with an engineer and I said, I want really good equipment. I want this to sound really good. What mics does WRIF have? Because I love the way WRIF sounds. They have RE20s.
Yep.
And I'm sure you're familiar with these. You guys are tech guys. You probably know
RE or EV, either one. Yep.
In fact, what kind of mics are you? Is that a Shure you're using, Bob?
So this is Shure SM7B, which is my two mics are the RE20 or the Shure. The Shure tends to block out echo and background noise a little better, but the RE20 actually I think sounds a little better. Yeah, there you go. That's it. Those are the two mics any podcast or radio person should have.
Yeah, I was on this Shure mic for about 20 minutes one day, and people went ballistic. What? That sounds like shit. It's terrible. I don't know why. I guess you want to bring up my RE20. They just like this a lot better, and I love the way it sounds. Yeah. We did the show for 4 months, and then two of the guys I was doing the show with, Mark and Brandon, were working at sports radio, and sports radio blew up. And so it was like, I have to pay these guys or they're not going to be able to do it. So we put up a donate bar, and we got, I think, $75,000 in 5 days. So I wrote the guys big checks for Christmas, and we had some people contacting us wanting to advertise. I just didn't like the idea of being a business person. I can't run a business. But it's not that complicated. It's a matter of, I do have to talk to advertisers more than I ever did. I found that I don't mind. I'm a better commercial reader because of it, because I know what they want to communicate. And, with radio, it was always push the button and 8 minutes later I'm on. Now I know who's behind it. I think I do a better job of selling the products. I don't take advertising that I don't believe in. We've had a couple offers from betting sites and stuff like that I just thought, no, that's bullshit. And one that said, let's see, win, get paid, it's that easy. And so anyway, I put some money on the site and tried to get paid, and it took 2 weeks to get paid. Unless I took in Bitcoin, I could have had it in 2 days. Like, I am not going to.
You have to do Bitcoin.
I will not do that. But we did it for 4 months for free, and then we started billing, and then the billing got better and better, and I was able to pay these guys, and they're paid. I think they're paid fairly. I mean, probably better than radio.
Having listened to your show a whole 3 times, but being blown away, I want to talk about your content and how you choose it a little bit, because these days, a lot of my friends tend to be old and white, think that the whole world revolves around politics. And I've become completely disgusted, as I wish I was from birth, with politics, because it's really about herding people into predictable camps to vote, and it's politics is a game of power, and it pervades anything where there's competition for money or power or control. And so these days, that seems to be a lot of what's on all the major newspapers' headlines. And you alluded to the tabloids a little. I actually think the tabloids are more refreshing these days than the Wall Street Journal and the New York, or the Washington Post or the New York Times. Those are the 3 I pay for. Do you? Can you talk about, like the other day you were talking about Britney Spears? I'm living here in Las Vegas and I hadn't heard about her. And so, and you know, it matters because these are real people dealing with real things. Yes, they happen to be celebrities, but it's more likely in my life that I'm going to have to deal with someone who's on meth than it is that I'm going to, have some effect on a stolen election. So anyway, talk about how you get your stuff and how you decide, because you seem to be right on top of things, and then I will hear about them the next day if they make the mainstream media.
Yeah, we're quick, and you know what? Everyone in the show preps hard. Everyone, I think that's one thing we have in common, and it really helps because I feel like the goal is we're not going to miss anything. And when I say miss, I mean anything that's really good, entertaining. And Britney Spears, why that's interesting to me is not because, she was that super hot girl in the school dress and all that. It's that she was in a conservatorship for 13 years, and then all of a sudden, her fans start saying, be free, let Britney be free. And everyone acted like they knew that was the right thing. And then she was free. And then all of a sudden she's nuts, spinning on Instagram and half nude or nude. And then her kids are saying, oh, it's really kind of embarrassing. And she's saying, my kids made me not believe in God. And, we were kind of following all this going, she's out of her mind.
Completely.
And it's just fascinating how the narrative that she should be free, freed her. And then she's free. And it's like, oh, this is a really bad idea. And so it's been an interesting story. I just find it, anything I find interesting, I don't care if it's in the business page or the gossip page or the sports page, because we talk about sports too. But the best sports story we've had in the last few days was Conor McGregor allegedly raped this girl at the Miami Heat game after punching out Bernie the mascot. And I don't know how much you guys follow UFC or Conor McGregor, but Ed, you probably heard about the story because you're doing AR every day.
Yep.
So that's the kind of sports story I like. And then there's the Cy Young Award winner, Trevor Bauer, who had a 5th woman accuse him of choking her unconscious. He's playing in Japan now because no major league team will sign him. So I think those non-sports stories are as interesting as the actual sports stories. X's and O's we don't get into because I think we don't narrowcast. And with politics, you have to be in an echo chamber. You can't be in the middle. If you're going to do a full-blown political show, you've got to be either right or left, or you'll just have angry people yelling at you all the time. So I really try to stay away from it as much as I can. When Trump's indicted for the 2nd time, obviously you can't ignore it.
That's on Entertainment Tonight. At that point. Yeah. I would rather look at what's funny about it. The guy that ran out in the street and got arrested, and the chick that got thrown out of the bar for asking, are you worried about going to prison? And they bolster from the club, and there's always some funny stories around it, but the politics of it, it's just so annoying, and it's trolling and triggering and all those words that these mental health people use. I really try to stay away from it. And I find that I like shows like that too. And, when you're talking about being a fan, I meant to mention Kevin Matthews, who was nominated with you for the Radio Hall of Fame this year. Do you guys know Kevin Matthews very well from I don't.
Chicago? He was on prior to Steve Dahl and Gary Meyer, Steve and Gary, and after Jonathan Brandmeier. And Kevin was the most creative of all of them. I'm not saying
Really?
he's the best show, but he was a voice guy like you, Ed. You know, you must know Kevin Matthews.
I don't. I knew Steve Dahl, but I didn't know Kevin Matthews.
He had a great character named Jim Shorts, who was a sports guy, and he did a lot of voices like Ditka, and he's a very Chicago guy. He's from Michigan, but he really anyway. I listened to his podcast. He spent with his sports character Jim Shorts, who is who's a real weasel and tells everybody shut up and screw off and all that. Anyway, Jim was in some kind of a weakened state. I think he was burned or something, and Jim spent 17 minutes on this podcast opening his Christmas package. I mean, all you could hear was, there's a lot of tape here. Hold on a second. He was going, how long is this going to go on? This is unbelievable. The character is really funny. The character would only speak about every 40 seconds or so. I got this side. Kevin is brilliant, and I just want to say that I looked at the list of people nominated today, and I said, and first of all, your name was mentioned first in Billboard, and in one other story I read, it said Bob Rivers leads the list of candidates, and I thought, wow, that's.
I didn't see any of that.
Yeah, Billboard had your name first, and I would say you and Kevin Matthews and maybe Charles Laquidera would be my 3 votes. I guess Kid Leo might go in there too. I don't know how many people go in, Bob. Of the
So there are 24 nominees. 8 will be inducted.
Okay.
Six will be, and I'm reading this right from the press release. 6 will be picked by essentially the Academy, a group of about 800 industry people, a private group. No one knows who they are. Except when they call me and say, "You got my vote," and I say, "That's one. That's one." But and then 2 are picked by the committee, which so they got 20. I think somewhere around 2,500 submissions, and they picked 24.
Wow.
And out of those 24, 8 will get in. And people are asking,
Third time for you nominated?
This is my 4th nomination. I'm the Susan Lucci of
Wow.
not my joke, but a friend of mine's joke, and it was pretty good. So look, it's an honor to be mentioned with those names. And every time I see Charles Laquidera, I'm like, wow, I idolized Charles. And there's so many people in there. Burt Weiss is an amazingly successful talent in Atlanta who's syndicated, who I got to meet at Morning Show Boot Camp last year. And, they're all better. Everyone is better than me, as far as I'm concerned, as I have that confidence that my father instilled in me from a young age.
Yeah, good.
I would like to hear, Ed Kelly, did you look at the list?
I have not seen the list. No, I don't subscribe to Billboard anymore.
Okay. Well, it's all over. If you Google Radio Hall of Fame, it'll give you the 24 names. And I knew a lot of the names. John DeBella's on there.
Yes.
I know John DeBella. I've heard John DeBella. Shadow Stevens is on there.
Shadow Stevens.
Mojo from Detroit. Matt Siegel from Boston. That's 3 Boston morning shows.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Matt Siegel certainly, I would think, would have a good shot. In fact, I'm surprised Matt Siegel's not in there. Wasn't he on KISS?
Kind of like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. There's a lot of people. Why aren't they in there?
Yeah. It's similar. I mean, I would just, even if you look at the list of people who are in there, the chance to join, Laurel and Hardy. It's intimidating. But look, it's good thing. And I'm enjoying it. I've had a heck of a year and a half, as everybody knows, with my health issues, which are, NED and in pretty good shape right now. I probably just have similar complaints to all 4 of you, because 60 is not the new 40. But it's great. And it's boy, there's people. I mean, the other 3 times I was nominated, Mark and Brian won, and
Jonathan
Brandmeier in Chicago. Of course. And so each time that would happen, part of me was like, well, yeah, duh. It's nice to be in the same, category. And so this year I was really hoping it would be all horrible people that were nominated that didn't deserve it.
Oh,
so I might have a chance.
But I will tell you, I looked up quite a few of the people on here, and I have no doubt in my mind that you and Kevin Matthews and Charles Laquidera should go in. There's no question in my mind. I don't know that that'll happen because you never know with these things. But Zip, did you look at the list at all?
I did not, but I'm pretty much in line with what you just said, honestly. And I remember you talking about Kevin Matthews ad nauseum to me in the early days, and Steve Dahl,
Yeah. Steve Dahl. Well, he's in. Stephen Gary, Brandmeier's in. That was a lineup. And, talking about being a fan of radio, I loved listening to radio in Chicago when Brandmeier, Kevin Matthews, Stephen Gary were on, and they made so much fun of the guys on GN back in the day. Eddie Schwartz, they made so much fun of the guy that was on overnights. They hired him for overnights. And their audience, the audience on the Loop loved hearing him because they'd heard him made fun of for so long. They actually were drawn to him. Crazy. But I would love to see you go in. I really would.
That's
it would
very
be
kind.
good.
I brought something out for this visit today that I think it might be time to play. Now, where are we at? I mean, again, this guy, Drew Lane, does a show 4 days a week. Each show, when I started the podcast, I was like, I wonder how long this is.
Yeah.
3 hours long.
Take a seat.
and never a dull moment in the whole thing, and tons of topics, by the way. If I really wanted to do that kind of show again, I would just get tapes of his the day before.
Do bullet points.
Well, I would have the same opinions. By the way, I can't get out of my head. Your love for Christy Brinkley was expressed so beautifully. And you talked about just what a beautiful woman she is and how amazing she is at this age. And then you went, and I love this about a great show, because I talk about opinions, why I could never do politics. My opinion changes in the middle of a sentence.
Yes.
I could not pick a side. And so you're talking about Christy Brinkley, and you're talking about just with the passion of someone who probably had her as a pinup all those years. And then you go, but she is getting a bit of a pumpkin head.
I wanted to carve it out. I saw it. It's the filler here.
Yeah. Sideways. Yeah.
Look, as you get older, and Dolly Parton, I don't care, whoever is beautiful, but as you get older, you go in and we go, how can we make it? And it's like a car, a classic car. They actually talk about when a classic car restores, can you look at it up close, or is it a 20-footer?
Yeah. 10-footer.
Right. And then from 50 feet away, it looks perfect. And so you said that, and then you guys whip out these pictures of her, and I'm like,
and yet my guys are really quick with that stuff.
They are. And the sound bites. Yeah.
Really fast.
And yet somehow, because this is your magic, Drew, done with love. There's always a heart to your show. It's never mean. It can be feeling mean if you're talking about my picture, but it's a celebrity. It's really a beautiful thing. It's been a pleasure listening to it. Now, what I'd like to do, and I believe that our webmaster, executive producer, who I'll bring on for just a second, he hates to be on. That's David Lee, who none of this could be possible.
Thank you, David.
Hello.
And Drew, the importance of a guy like David.
Sure.
Yeah. David, do you have the Bob and Zip video that was played on V66 and on MTV? Recently,
yes, I do.
All right. Recently, the V66, there was a really blurry vision available that was really awful. Recently, the V66 people posted a pretty good quality video. So this is me and Zip. Do you know the year? 83, 4? It was right after, it was at the time that Van Halen and David Lee Roth were breaking up.
I don't know if I can do this, Marty.
What year?
1988.
Was it 88? No, it could have been 88 because I was already in Baltimore, but you're close.
They split up around 84, I think.
Okay.
Pretty sure.
And so there was a new MTV clone in Boston called V66.
Bob, there's a documentary about V66. You might be in it. Did you know that?
So when I do stuff like that, I never watch it.
Yeah.
I hate myself.
I don't like watching either.
Yeah, I've retired from public life.
He's stealing that line,
Yeah.
that, right?
Oh, totally. because that was always the worst part of my job, is to go out and, you know, be at the auto dealer. And I love the clients. I would go visit the owner of the auto dealership and have lunch and hang out all day. But anyway, so V66 has just released this video. Take it away, Dave.
Okay, kids, here's that hit video you've all been waiting for. It's by that toe-headed beach bum, and it's called Just a Gigolo, exclusively right here on Bob and Zip TV. Oh, man. I can't believe we're playing this crap. Me neither. I'll tell you, if we were going to make a video, it would be a lot better than this junk. That's right. You know, we wouldn't have to rip anybody off. No, are you kidding? We would come up with something totally original. Something that's never been done before. In fact, we'll go something like this. I'm just a big ego, and everywhere I go, people say that they adore me. They pay for just a chance to look at my tight pants. Ooh, it makes them horny. There will come a day when I'll get old and gray. Ooh, what will they say about me? When the end comes down low, I've got a big ego. The world revolves around me, and I make a lot of dough. Everywhere I go, you should see the cars I'm driving. And all the chicks I meet fall down at my feet. Ooh, they love my jiving. And I didn't write this song, 'cause it would take too long and ruin the fun I'm having. When the press comes around to print anything I say, let them write about me. Falling for me. In England and in France, I've got them in a trance. They can't live without me. There will come a day, this hunk will pass away. Ooh, how will they live without me? When the end comes down low, I was just a big ego. The world revolves around me.
Boston Rock Video, WVJV, a couple of morning guys from WAAF. That is Bob and Zip. And I've got just a big ego. Very well could be the case of David Lee Roth and Van Halen, as you have probably been reading and hearing about it. No kind words between David Lee Roth and Eddie Van Halen. They are splitting up, and supposedly Eddie Van Halen getting together with Sammy Hagar to release some material, and David Lee Roth going on a solo tour, and he's going to make his acting debut. Can you see David Lee Roth making his acting debut? Boy, oh boy, I can hardly wait.
Oh man, was that Ian O?
That's Ian O'Malley. Yes,
that was Ian O'Malley. Yeah,
Yes.
Ian was working nights at AF when I got there, and Ian went on to work at what's the, not MTV, but what's the old people's MTV?
VH1. VH1. Yes, very well said.
Yeah, it was on VH1, and he's been on radio in New York. In fact, I can't believe how many people from AAF spread their wings and got out there. But that was really, I remember playing that on WROV. That was on the American Comedy Network, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
My version was on there, which was just Frozen Embryo. Do you remember when they had the big controversy?
I remember that.
I'm just an embryo, frozen, don't you know? My parents made a court case of me. I'm not a baby, not even a fetus. I don't know what all of the fuss is about. I ain't got nobody.
Yeah. You would be so canceled right now for that.
Funny how we remember lyrics from these songs like Zip. I know you and I can't have a conversation without bringing up the Neil Lomax.
Yes.
Which was to Hip to Be Square, Huey Lewis, and it was Neil's Hip Needs Repair.
At least it was close.
When Neil puts on his underwear. I remember Zip, that was your hook. Zip was great with hooks. But that was a great video.
Yeah.
The sax player in there, by the way, is Derek Dyer, who was Tina Turner's touring saxophonist. He's the guy on those videos of her live from Rio at the top of her career. He also toured with Joe Cocker. And, these were, by the way, I miss the days when you could go on the radio and say, hey, we need about 500 girls in bikinis to show up at Revere Beach at 10 a.m. on Saturday.
I'm going to ask.
Yeah. And they, would not only show up, but be totally into it. And Zip and I, we used to do our show in that exact same pair of swim shorts. By the way,
did that get played on MTV?
It did get played on MTV.
Wow.
And so did the I Am Santa Claus one. And yes.
Now, did Stockman direct that? Steve Stockman?
Steve Stockman actually directed
early.
that.
Yeah.
Who was David Lee Roth?
A listener, and not the singer, by the way. The singer is a guy named John Sullivan, who's a great vocalist and still writes songs to this day. I ended up meeting up with him again in Springfield when I lived in Vermont. Someone called me and said, I know the singer. You have to get this guy. And it was like a girl who knew him and said, no, you're the perfect guy to do this. And she ended up marrying him. And they and their daughter live 4 miles from us in Vermont. And so, all of this stuff that happened had such magic to it. But he sang the vocal absolutely perfectly. And then when we needed, he didn't look like David Lee Roth. So we looked for a lookalike to do that. But in Revere Beach, you could get like today, you'd need a permit. You'd need, film permit. You'd need a license. You'd need to
hazmat suit.
Yeah. Back then, hazmat, yeah, because it's polluted.
Did you even call and tell them you were coming?
Not a thing. No. We pulled up in the WAAF promo van and got out and.
Oh yeah, the rock bus. That thing was huge. What was the cost of making that video? Did AF pay for it?
Yeah, I didn't pay for anything back then. I have no recollection, but yeah, I don't know how they. So here's the thing you got to know. To me, I've been living a dream because I've been surrounded by smart, funny, intelligent people, and how they all just showed up and and all of that happened. I was, I would have the idea, and Zip used to talk about this too. How did you get all this? And I would just create, and you must do this a little bit, Drew. You just create the whirlwind around you. And then for a period of time, I just felt very blessed that all of these things, I mean, the Orioles marathon started with me sitting at a game next to my GM and Chris Emery, the afternoon guy at 98 Rock. And I said, wow, they're really sucking. I said, this is horrific. Because I was from Boston. So my natural inclination was to hate the team.
Sure.
And Chris Emery leaned over to the general manager, because I was still the new guy, not that well respected. And he said, you should have Rivers stay on the air till the Orioles win a game. And as soon as he said it, the part of me that is a complete, take advantage of any situation. What do you call that? Not entrepreneurial, exploitative part of me went, oh, that would work here. And I said, I'll do it if you want me to. And he said, well, they're only down 6-0. Let's see if they lose tonight. And, that's, so all of these things just sort of plucked out of the, good friendships and fun, and even people who despised me.
Well, I always thought you were a promotional person beyond what I knew, because I remember you were buying billboards in opposing towns when the Seahawks were in playoff games, and they were really provocative or, would get people all pissed off. And those are great. They always got lots of publicity. You know how to get them in the newspaper, which was a big deal back then because, and now it'd be easier with the internet. My God.
The next time I'm in the newspaper, it'll be an obituary.
Oh, you're going in the Radio Hall of Fame. That's the next thing in the paper.
Well, maybe the newspaper would cover that. Thank you. That's very nice.
Yes, they will.
Yeah.
No,
Wow.
when do you find out, Bob? I think I'm more excited about this than you are. When does this happen? If it happens?
I believe the voting is for the next 2 weeks till the end of the month, and then they announce the winners sometime. I think it's on a press release somewhere. Sometimes towards the end of July, maybe it's the 24th or the 27th. So yeah, I'm excited about it. I'm not one of those people that says I don't care about these awards. On the other hand, however it goes, just to be. Remember, I started off sending tapes to Scott Shannon and Rick Dees. I started off listening to WNEW, Scott Muni. I literally sat in front of the mirror. Did you ever do a mirror rehearsing voices? Like Stern did with the WNBC. I was doing Scott Muni.
I recorded into I had a little tape recorder I used to practice into, but not so much in front of the mirror. I always liked being the guy in the studio that nobody could see. Sure. Like I said, and that's why I've retired from public life. Why now? Where did you live growing up, Bob?
Grew up in Brantford, Connecticut. And Zip also grew up in Connecticut, Hartford area. And so I listened to New York radio. My whole birth of my thoughts about radio came from the biggest stations in the biggest radio city in the world. And for talk, it was Gene Shepard. And I don't know if you know much about him, but he did a talk show on WOR. Then there was Bob and Ray on WOR. So those were comedy sketches and bits. And so growing up listening to those people, to me, that's what radio was. It was a combination of freewheeling, but also produced to sound bigger than life.
Well, I missed the production part of radio so much because people did great production. When you guys were doing your parodies, who was the guy, Billy West at WBCN? He was doing parodies that were no better than yours. And he went on to do, cartoons. And what did Billy West do? Didn't he do Ren and Stimpy? He did tons of stuff. He was a huge guy in Hollywood.
We lost step somehow, but that's okay. Yes. And by the way, I idolized him. I thought his parodies were incredible because they were on the Charles Laquidera show, partially making that bigger than life. But there was this guy just getting started back then. I forget which year. This guy, Weird Al Yankovic.
Yeah.
And as I was ramping up, he was signed to Scotty Brothers Records. And I thought, I need a record label too. And eventually, that would be Atlantic Records. Someone big at Atlanta heard the parodies and said, let's sign this up. And it all worked from like being played on MTV, stuff like that. Being proximity to New York, people would reach out to you. But anyway, it was Weird Al Yankovic, and I would interview him over the years, he really did it right to have a career. He got permission from all of the artists he parodied, and he parodied the biggest songs. Beat It became Eat It with Michael Jackson's Blessing. So the record companies could totally get behind him. And then at one point I did an interview with him where he actually came on the air to our show apologetic. He said, I'm so sorry that so many songs online are being credited as my songs when they're actually your songs.
Wow, that's great. That's incredible.
And it was very kind of him.
You've probably done more parodies than Al Yankovic's done.
The count that I have in my archives is over 600. I probably did, but I also did more shitty ones than he did. If you've ever listened to old tapes, you know what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. What was Al Yankovic's? Was it My Bologna?
Yes.
Or another one, Rides the Bus, or it was one of those.
Oh, and like a surgeon or like a sturgeon.
Yeah.
And they were cute and funny and accessible to everybody. Whereas I would take, harsher things like, does anybody really know where Bosnia is? Does anybody even care? I would take politics, and the inspiration for how we did politics was Johnny Carson. Back then, you had a guy who could be middle of the road and poke fun at both sides. And politics was not so divisive. course, it was all curated by 3 networks who would say to themselves things like, let's not talk about Jackie Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe because that'll be disruptive. So you didn't have the kind of the go for it lowbrow stuff. And you could back then do what would be too edgy today.
I personally don't understand why these late night shows are so. I mean, they hate Trump. All the jokes are about Trump, which is fine. They're funny jokes, but nobody on the right can watch those shows. And I've noticed their numbers have gone down. Kimmel, who I love and I think is so funny, is doing like less than $1 million a night now. And I'm thinking, how long can they continue to pay him, $12-13 million if he's doing less than $1 million? That's
well, part of that is he's making content online that doesn't get counted as his nightly ratings. And by the way, the answer to this is my son, Andrew, who's a comic. He's 38 years old. He subscribes to nothing. Everything he wants to watch, he can find on the internet. Oh, well, then you miss out on lots of great streaming shows. No, I don't. All those shows repackage their stuff into best of clips. And you too, you're on YouTube with that Christy Brinkley thing.
Sure.
And, if I don't have 3 hours to listen to your whole show, but I watch that clip.
Yeah.
So that's the business model now, I think, with those guys.
Well, that's what, people are telling me. You have to do your show on YouTube. You have to force your entire audience to go over to YouTube. And we have the audience so trained to listen to us on iTunes and Spotify and all those places, and to be an audio only show, that they don't care. They don't need to see us.
Let's bring in my executive producer, Dave, who's been telling me you have to do your whole show on YouTube. You have to get them all to go over to YouTube. Right, Dave?
That's what everyone tells me too, Dave. And some people make some money on YouTube too. We just got a check for, was it $289?
Yep.
$289 for, I don't know, 150,000 views or something. So if you make something really go viral, you can make some money.
You can. And my son, Andrew, who's a stand-up comic, is tens of millions of views on Facebook and on those short reels. And they send him checks every month, and they're reasonably substantial sometimes. But you it's like Seymour. You have to keep feeding Seymour.
Yeah.
If you put all your stuff out there and then you do nothing for a couple of months, then it's almost like Top 40 radio. It's like these little reels of comics are records that get played, and they're making huge stars like Taylor Tomlinson. You're familiar with her? Great young comedian, sells out 6 nights in a row in Vegas at huge numbers. And so you can these days become a star using this social media if you hit just right.
Oh my God, yes. Hey, are you guys playing music anymore? Because Zip, I know you love to play the drums, and Bob, you play music too, don't you?
Zip's still a great multi-instrumentalist, by the way. He can play drums, keyboards, organ. I'm his spokesperson now because he doesn't like to toot his horn. Go ahead, Zip.
Stop. No, I do. I got a couple of Weekend Warrior gigs, but Bob was touring with the Remnants of Heart for quite some time.
Really?
That wasn't the name of the band, the Remnants of Heart, but
were Ann and Nancy among the remnants?
No, it was the rhythm section. Steve Fossen and Mike DeRozier, literally one of the best rock rhythm sections of all time.
Okay.
And they tour with 2 younger gals who Summer Masick is actually married to Steve Fossen, and Lizzie, Lizzie Damont, is just an incredible multi-instrumentalist. And then they have a guitar player as well, and they're just incredible. And basically, I got asked to sit in with the band. I'm a producer. I'm not a musician. Zip knows this story very well. We could speak for each other continually if you want to, because that's how you know people are married.
That's not true. That's not true.
Yeah, he's being kind.
Something came up this week that I really want to ask you about, Bob, because it's not like the first story you told for the first time today, but this one's a little easier, I think, to probably get into. And that is, I was led to believe that when Kurt Cobain died, that the electrician or that may have called your radio station or your show at that time. And I've never known the story. And so what happened?
We received a call from a super fan of our show, and you have super fans too. You know the kind that are just there for you at all times. Yeah. You wonder, like, should they get a life? Sort of like Captain Kirk will ask someone to, but they literally would do anything for your show. And there was this guy, Daryl. He was an amazing loser. not a loser, a luge. Like he did the luge where he would go down steep streets at ridiculous speeds, and is a daredevil and just a great guy. And he was a subcontractor of some sort. And one morning we get the call. It's Daryl. He's got something for you. And I go, well, what is it? And he says he's at Kurt Cobain's house, and they think Kurt Cobain may have killed himself because there's a lot of activity around the garage, and they're cordoning it off. And they said someone died in there. He didn't know if it was Kurt Cobain, but he said it really looks, very bad. And I'm thinking about this, and you make a decision whether you go with it or whether you wait for confirmation. And if you're like today, everybody fights to be first. Who calls the state first? And I guess that's always been the way of journalism. But I remember thinking, if I went on with that and it was wrong, it would be one of the most shameful things I've ever done. I just wouldn't do it. And so I said, yeah, thanks. And we're going to wait and hear what happens. And of course, 20 minutes later, he calls our next in line competitor, the Mountain, and
no way,
and speaks to Marty Reamer, who's let's put it this way: if I was number 4 and I needed to get attention, maybe I would have gone with it. Anyway, he spoke to Marty, and so the Mountain broke that story. And I could have. And looking back, it was just one of those calls. I would get a call every time. I would get a call about deep, dark gossip about somebody in the city who was famous. I would go, nah, I'm going to wait until, confirmation from a couple of sources. So yes, that morning that did happen. And one of our listeners was there, and it changed the city. I hate to say this, but in some ways it cemented grunge as well as classic rock, because you had I don't want to call him a martyr, but you had a guy of immense, incredible talent who couldn't stand the pressure and is brilliant and world-class and game-changing as Nirvana was, and they were. You lost him just like Jim Morrison at 27 years old.
No, I remember where I was when I found out. I was on Southfield Freeway, and I heard it on 89X here. And then I had heard that one of the rock stations, and I just assumed it was KISW because you were doing so well out there at that time. But I didn't know you were called, and then the other guy. So the other guy broke it, and then were you still on the air when that happened?
Let me interject here because I want to say I love Marty Reamer. He's a great guy. I've always been friendly with him. I don't know if this part has ever been taught. What was the question again?
Were you still on the air when the other station went with it?
Oh yeah. No, it broke over the next hour, and it was just a didn't want to be first with it, didn't want to be wrong.
Yeah,
but yes, it changed. There was a huge rally in Seattle Center. Courtney spoke. We were not big fans of Courtney, but we gave her a break on this day. And you had that feeling that you had when you were younger, and you would lose, these big stars. That art is passion, and passion is not always pleasant. You would think that because someone's a rock star, they must be happy, right? You've got all this adoration of fame, and there's a great book, by the way, written by a guy named Charles Cross about Kurt Cobain. He's also written autobiographies for Heart and other bands, but he's the definitive thing to read about Kurt if you want to hear all sides of it.
I've seen documentaries on Kurt, and I've read about Kurt, and I find myself not wanting to read more and more because it always feels dark and sad, and I love the music. The music stands up so well. I mean, I look at the streaming world now in terms of classic rock, and it fascinates me to see what still is popular, what is a thing now as opposed to then. And Nirvana is still a huge thing, streaming.
Yeah. I'll say this. If you're thinking of cool places to go and travel, you could check Aberdeen, Washington off your list.
Okay.
If you don't like dark, broody places that don't make you feel good about the world. Actually, Aberdeen's better now. But there is a memoriam park to him there on the Wishkah River bank where he grew up, and you can go by his childhood home. But you could just sit there and and imagine what it was like to be in that era. And in Seattle at that time, grunge, or the G word as we call it, grunge was so big that record companies were flying into Seattle and signing bands, just even just to get as many Seattle bands as possible. And there was something about the cloudy darkness that breeds serial killers and great dark rock music.
I wonder though, when all that was happening, Soundgarden, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, all Screaming Trees, so many bands blew up at once in that town. And our radio station, WRIF, we were the type that stayed off that. Oh, no, don't play local music. Nobody cares about that. It's bad for ratings, and really wasn't on top of it. Was KISW? Were you guys tight with those bands, or
yeah?
Yeah.
So there was a scene. There was a music scene when I arrived in 1989, and Spike tells a story of going down to Pioneer Square and popping his head into a club and seeing Alice in Chains. There was this scene. There's a band called the Melvins, which on my website I'm going to post this clip of them. That was, I believe, one of Kurt's favorite bands.
Yes, as
legend goes. And I had them at my house play in my garage, a live track for our show. And if you listen to that Melvins track, you can imagine what Kurt was thinking. Like, it was an underground dark, and it was not that melodic. So it was had elements of punk. And what Kurt, I believe, did, and the band did, because clearly Dave Grohl was, no
pretty
wallflower. What that band did is take that energy, that counterculture, not trying to have hits, and come up with melodic lyrics and hooks that became infectious, sometimes from the first listen, but with repeated listens, they had obviously a long shelf life, as they're in the Hall of Fame. And but it wasn't just Nirvana. All of these other bands were developing in tandem. Stone Temple Pilots, of course, we call them the Stone Gossard Pirates. And so they ended up affecting the whole country with a copycat. But and I won't call it copycat. We were all influenced by the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and they were influenced by the great blues guys. So it's not that's when music is at its best. Great artists, and I think we said this about radio too, love and are huge fans of other great artists, and they are inspired to make something brand new that just fits the mood, the consciousness, the psyche of the times. And so it was incredible to be in Boston when the Cars, the Talking Heads, Jay Giles, Aerosmith. I mean, I felt like I had nothing to do with any of this, by the way, but I felt like, very blessed and very lucky to experience that in Boston and record Twisted Tunes at Longview Farm, where the Rolling Stones hung out, and then to be in Seattle and see all of this start to happen. We started doing a thing called Live at Bob's Garage, where our music director, Kathy Faulkner, would basically say to a band that was coming into town, would you like to do a live broadcast on the radio of 3 of your songs? And they would say, because they were still poor, some of the ones that weren't poor did say yes, but whether it was a classic rock band like Blue Oyster Cult, and remember, this is before tribal casinos started paying classic rock bands good money. So Blue Oyster Cult, because they loved music as much as you love doing your podcast, would come to town to play in a room that 300 people could fit in this bar called the Firehouse. And Kathy, and even then, they might not sell tickets. So Kathy would say, would you, or the promotion director would say, would you like to do a live at Bob's Garage? And they literally would drive to my house. Blue Oyster Cult drove to my house, set up in the garage.
Wow.
Neighbors would come over, and they would play "Don't Fear the Reaper," Godzilla, and one other song, and we would mix it. Yeah, and it would be, and so the next thing that would happen is here's an up and coming band called the Toadies. They have a song called Possum Kingdom, which is one of the great one-hit wonder grunge songs of that era.
Mhm.
And I get a call from them. We're on our way from Portland. They're getting there at 8 a.m. They've only had 3 hours sleep. And I'm thinking, oh, they're going to be burned out. They didn't sound excited about doing it. You know, the record company said, you have to do this, Bob's Garage. It's 8 a.m. in North Bend, Washington. And and I had this feeling like, oh, this is not going to go good. So I called them en route, and I said, hey, why don't we meet at the Marti Diner and have breakfast before you do it? That was the diner made famous in Twin Peaks, the television show. And we sat, we had eggs, we had bacon, and we hung out. And by the time we got to the house, you know, they were on their second wind, and we recorded this incredible version of that song. And so from the little grunge bands to the big classic rock bands, it was, again, once it started, I talked about just being sort of a vessel for this stuff to come through. Once it would start, they just kept coming. Randy Bachman, Foghat, and then on the grunge side, Collective Soul, and a bunch of other bands. And my kids are out there playing, you know, football in the backyard with Collective Soul. So it was.
Are those tracks available? Are you able to make them available?
So in part to promote without blowing my own horn, but I have the horn underneath the desk.
Go ahead.
Yes, what's going up on my website in a day or two, and let's all kiss Dave's ass because he's putting the stuff up there. Is probably my favorite Twisted Tunes and Bob's Garages, and then a bunch of air checks from the show. A lot of people never heard the show, by the way, because
it just wasn't that easy back in the day. I mean, when did people start streaming live? I mean, in the 2000s, but I don't think a lot of people listened to. I just started streaming radio stations live maybe in the last 4 or 5 years.
Me too. And by the way, streaming took off, podcasting took off, but you know, my number one question when we started podcasting 4 years ago, I would get is, how do you listen to a podcast?
Yeah. Along with, what time is it on?
Yeah. Ask your granddaughter, she'll show you. But now I believe that's all, you know, now people know the content is, and we got trained by the TV. Do you ever, if you watch something live, it's sports probably.
Yes.
Right?
Very little do I watch live now. I'm just like a 20-year-old, I think, in my habits. In my streaming habits, I just don't watch live television anymore. I mean, I'm amazed when I look at the ratings. I go, wow, there's 7 million people watching American Idol live. That's wild. I just don't picture people doing that. But I've been recording shows for really probably a couple decades just to save time and watch something before work, for example, in the morning. And you can see a show in 42 minutes instead of an hour.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If it's a big show, if it's Seinfeld or something, I really want to see it for work.
By the way, viewing is compartmentalized now and spread apart like that. It's a lot to do with everything. We have different tiers of being able to afford to watch stuff. I mean, I have all the streaming channels I want, and I know that's a luxury not everyone can afford. And then there are a whole lot of people who work their asses off, go to work every day, come home every night, and they only watch free TV because, you know, a budgetary concern and even a time concern. If you only have a certain amount of time, 1 or 2 hours a day, and these TV shows, I think, are built for the working class. And, you know, it's American Idol, or it's America's Got Talent. Mm-hmm. It's a soap opera, you know, you can get into and follow and get the drama. And, you know, I would watch them, except I'm too crowded out with big, huge shows that are produced extremely well, but I get to pay for them. It's like newspapers. Almost nobody, like you subscribe to a few, I subscribe to a few. But the majority of people I know go, I'm not giving Jeff Bezos $8.
No, I don't know many people who have as many subscriptions as I do.
Yeah.
Because I get Billboard and Rolling Stone, and I pay for that. I don't know why, but I do. Just don't want to miss anything.
Well, if there was an article that put me first, I'm going to go back to the newsstand and get the Rolling Stone issue.
Bob, you don't have to pay for a Billboard subscription to see your name. You don't even have to log in. that little bit, it's right there. You can see it without paying for it.
Oh, that's even better. My wife will appreciate that, by the way.
I can send you a picture.
She wants to purge all these unnecessary subscriptions. Well, Drew Lane, this has been just... by the way, this was us interviewing you, and you turned it about at least 50% of the time, and I hope that anyone listening this far obviously appreciates what you do. But I would say if you are looking for a morning show that is very similar to ours in some ways, but hosted by this guy, you won't be disappointed. The Drew and Mike Show. It should be noted that Mike was your on-air broadcast partner.
Yes.
And he passed away, and you kept the name of the show to honor him, I assume.
Yeah, I did. We had started in the podcast in 2016, and Mike's health wasn't great. I know that might shock you, Zip.
I was just going to say, when did you quit smoking finally?
I've quit probably 5 times. I'm currently do smoke, not nearly what I used to smoke, but
well, thank God.
I'm looking to quit again. Actually, I have a patch on right now. I have.
Well, there you go. I was just going to say,
what a good day to ask that question. Yeah,
in Detroit, I think, God, everybody smoked except for Trudy.
Mike smoked a lot. Mike smoked 3 or 4 packs a day. But that's actually not what got him. He had some issues related to a motorcycle accident he was in when he was 22 years old that he never rehabbed properly, and his leg was bothering him, so he's barely getting around, and he just he died in his sleep in 2018. Come back from when WRIF let us go. I did sports radio for 2.5 years. Mike was not a sports guy at all. So Mike wasn't doing anything. He was doing a little podcasting, actually. And then when I got let go from the sports station, I said, let's try a podcast and put the show back together. And Mike did, even though he was only able to do a couple days a week. And so people were excited that we were back together, and it was going a lot like what you guys are doing. And it was really fun. And then things got bad health wise. And then Mike passed, and it just seemed I just couldn't change the name. I certainly couldn't do it then. But yeah, I've really enjoyed this, guy. Zip, it's great to see you. You look fantastic.
Oh, thank you, man. Let me just say, I was really honored and very fortunate in my time to work with both of you. Seriously, it was always fun.
No,
it really was.
I had a blast, and it was fantastic. The show you came on in 2016, it was really a fun show. We should do it again. And Bob, you got to come on too on my show.
It would be my pleasure. Drew Lane, folks. The Drew and Mike Show is available on all your podcasting platforms. Great clips on YouTube. Just search Drew and Mike podcast, and you will find it. Drew?
Thank you, Bob.
Till we meet again. Awesome.
Good luck. I'm really rooting for you, Bob.
Oh, thank you. Yes, there's that.
I'll send you the picture of Billboard. You can see your name without subscribing. Okay.